Israel is coming back to Africa, and Africa is coming back to Israel.
So, couple of problems here. First off, this guy who happens to be the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, is currently facing a criminal indictment during the third election in 1 year. And this same guy who says Africa is coming also said that Africans inside Israel are a concrete threat to the Jewish and democratic character of the country, and has been trying to kick out thousands of African refugees and migrants out of Israel. A matter dubbed by Israeli politicians as the African menace.
Did he say menace?
Like Dennis? More seriously, there's something big going on between Israel and many African nations. Benjamin Netanyahu started off last week by announcing that for the first time commercial Israeli planes will be flying over Sudanese airspace. 2 weeks after meeting Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, Sudan's de facto leader. So is Bibi trying to win favor before the March 2nd election by bigging up his foreign policy successes? Well, actually, this news is just one part of a much larger puzzle of Israel's presence in Africa. Here's a photo of Netanyahu in Uganda last month meeting East African leaders. Here's a photo of Netanyahu meeting Chad's Idris Deby after a 46-year diplomatic hiatus. Here's another one of Netanyahu's speeches at ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States. And here's one from a 2016 visit, which marked the first African trip an Israeli Prime Minister has made since Yitzhak Rabin almost 3 decades ago. A host of African leaders have also made the trip to Tel Aviv, seeking warmer relations with Israel over the past few years. So you get the point, this Israel-Africa nexus is going down, and we're gonna have a quick chat about it like good African journalists.
Well, you're not African.
What? Most African nations gained their independence during the 1960s. Israel was one of the first countries to establish diplomatic relations and offer assistance. Israeli ambassadors operated in 33 African countries at the time. Their eagerness is best encapsulated by renowned Israeli politician Golda Meir. Did we go into Africa because we wanted votes at the United Nations? Yes. And so in the 1950s and early 60s, Israel was exercising its soft power in Africa to gain recognition as a young state and to gain as many Jewish migrants as it could from Africa to ensure a Jewish majority in occupied Palestinian territories. But the 1967 Six-Day War and the 1973 Yom Kippur War were breaking points in the relations with the continent. 7 African nations severed ties with Tel Aviv, and 23 more broke off relations after the invasion of the Sinai Peninsula. It got so bad that in 1975, 19 African countries voted for a UN resolution classifying Zionism as racism. But things got better after the 1978 Camp David Accords, as Egypt and Israel signed a peace deal, and ever since Israel has been working to improve its relations with the continent. Today, the matter of lobbying in the international arena is also of importance to Israel, particularly in turning around the pattern of voting against Tel Aviv at forums like the UN. For example, Israel has recently established good relations with Togo. The small West African nation was the only African country among 9 states to vote against the UN resolution condemning the United States' recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. And so this policy of befriending African nations for votes is paying dividends. In 2015, Israel successfully blocked a resolution at the International Atomic Energy Agency that would have made inspections of Israel's nuclear plants mandatory. But it was only possible because Burundi, Kenya, Rwanda, and Togo came to the rescue and voted against the measure, while another 7 countries abstained and 8 were absent. The UN and the IAEA are not the only forms of interest. Netanyahu has been pursuing an observer status for Israel at the African Union, which was revoked in 2002 at the behest of Libya's Muammar al-Gaddafi. Palestine, unlike Israel, does have observer status at the African Union, and Palestinian leaders often address the community of African states where they rally support for self-determination and their struggle against Israeli occupation. Other diplomatic wins for Israel in Africa include establishing relations with Muslim-majority states such as Mali, Chad, and most recently, Sudan. Establishing relations with Muslim-majority nations means that Netanyahu is breaking Israel's regional isolation, as well as dividing the Muslim world from its traditionally pro-Palestinian stance. Israel is also getting help from the US and its other Arab allies on this front. The meeting between Netanyahu and Sudan's al-Burhan was facilitated by the UAE. Israel gains a large partner in a historically hostile neighborhood, and Sudan, through Israel, gains the favor of the Trump administration by being removed from the US terror list and in turn sees the lifting of sanctions. Aside from diplomacy, the Africa-Israel nexus has a large money trail as well. The continent is home to almost a fifth of the world's population and home to 6 of the world's 10 fastest growing economies as of 2018. These economies need help with infrastructure, technology, and particularly agriculture and water. Israel says that it can help with that. In 2017, Israeli officials signed a memorandum of understanding to invest $1 billion by 2021 to advance green energy and power projects across the 15 members of ECOWAS. Israeli investment also goes beyond the public sector. Tech companies such as IA and New Filtration have used Israeli technology to produce water pumping and water purifying systems, expanding access to clean water in at-risk areas. For example, during an outbreak of cholera in Cameroon in the summer of 2018, New Filtration implemented a device that turns contaminated river water into purified drinking water. Israeli NGOs have also helped on the humanitarian front in an effort to win more hearts and minds. But they are also selling arms. The reason given is for fighting extremist groups. Kenyan President Kenyatta highlighted this common goal in his trip to Israel in 2016. The first area of cooperation, he said, is our common battle against militant Islamic terrorism. The rise of Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, Al-Shabaab, various Daesh affiliates, and Boko Haram have all raised alarms across the region. And so Israeli arms and military training have been extended, allowing the Israeli arms trade to expand. It was even mentioned in 2016 that Israel will be helping Kenya build an approximately 708,000-meter wall along the border with Somalia to improve security. And so you have it. Even the idea of building walls is being exported, which is a good segue into the elephant in the room, which is that as much as Israel wants to be back in Africa, does it want to keep Africans out of Israel? Netanyahu has described African migrants and refugees in the past as infiltrators who have either the choice to leave the country and take their money or spend the rest of their lives in an Israeli prison. And the Israeli government has literally done that. Tel Aviv offers money, around $3,500, a ticket to a third African country, or jail time for refugees within its borders. A policy which has come under fire by human rights organizations like Amnesty International, as well as many Israeli Jews who recognized that Israel is a country built on the concept of refuge, but is turning its back on that very concept. There are also more than 140,000 Ethiopian Jews living in Israel. They suffer from higher unemployment rates than the rest of the population, lower school enrollment, lower annual income, and higher conviction rates, a matter that has sparked frequent anti-government protests in recent years. And so the question here is clear. Will Africa continue falling for Netanyahu's charm offensive at the behest of Palestinians and Africans alike?